Hey everyone, so on today's episode, we're going to be doing another non-rum based tiki cocktail. We're going to be remaking a classic that I think is honestly pretty bad, and I'm going to rebalance this cocktail, change out a few ingredients to keep the same flavor profiles, and make it what I think a way better cocktail. So today, we're going to be improving upon the Polynesian Paralysis. I'm Andy, this is Easy Tiki Drink, so let's do this. Alright, so today on the channel we're going to be taking a look at the mid-century classic, the Polynesian Paralysis. Now this drink came about in the 1960s in a book by H. Allen Smith called Waikiki Beatnik, and at which point he termed this cocktail as like a screaming desire to not go back to work. Now, I'm going to go over the original recipe, I'm going to make my recipe, and I'm going to talk about the flavor profile of mine, how it matches the original flavor profile, and some of the decisions I made. But in order for me to actually go over the original recipe, I got to pull my phone out because I can never remember this cocktail because it just makes no sense to me. So give me 1 second. So according to the Total Tiki app, the original recipe is 3 ounces of orange juice, 3 ounces of unsweetened pineapple juice, 3/4 ounce of lemon juice, 1/2 ounce of sugar syrup, 1 ounce of Orgeat, 3 ounces of Curacao, which I can never pronounce correctly, but essentially it's like an old school like rye or bourbon style spirit. There is still one company in the world, I believe in Hawaii, that actually does still make it. I heard it isn't really that great though. So typically we see bourbon subbed out in this for most modern interpretations of it. So yeah, I mean, it's got 6 ounces of juice in it, 3 ounces of orange juice, 3 ounces of pineapple juice, and only 3/4 ounce of lemon juice, plus 1/2 ounce of simple syrup, and an ounce of Orgeat. So you've got 1.5 ounces of sweetener on top of 6 ounces of sweet juice with only 3 ounces of lemon juice to cut through that. It is completely unbalanced and honestly leaves a lingering foot taste in my mouth. It's not good. So let's see what we're gonna need to make my version of the Polynesian Paralysis. I'll shake one up, I'll talk about it, and yeah, we'll see if you like mine better or not. Anyway, to make my Polynesian Paralysis, you're gonna need bourbon, rye whiskey, orange liqueur, orgeat, pineapple juice, lemon juice, aromatic bitters, and saline solution. So as you can see, a lot of the same ingredients stick true, right? Like I'm using whiskey. Now I'm splitting my base, and I'll talk about that after we build this. My orange is in the form of something else, but other than that, a lot of the same ingredients stick. So let's build this cocktail. I'm gonna sip on it and tell you all about the choices I made and why I made them. So grab your shaking tin, because that's what we're gonna build it in. In a shaking tin, you're gonna add 5 drops of saline solution. Follow that up with 2 dashes of aromatic bitters, 3/4 ounce or 22.5 milliliters of lemon juice, 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of pineapple juice, 3/4 ounce or 22.5 milliliters of Orgeat, 1/2 ounce or 15 milliliters of your orange liqueur, 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of your rye whiskey, and 1.5 ounces or 45 milliliters of bourbon. Add some pebble ice to your shaking tin and give it a nice shake for about 5 to 8 seconds. Grab a Collins glass and open pour in. Top it off with more pebble ice. And we're gonna garnish with a mint sprig, orange wheel, and a Surfside sip straw. So there you have it, my version of the Polynesian Paralysis. Let's give it a try. So that is such a good cocktail. Now, I am gonna tell you it does border on the slightly sweeter side, and I designed that on purpose. The original one is super sweet, so I didn't want to just completely remove the sweetness from this cocktail. I do want it to be more balanced, but it does tend, right? So if balance is 50-50, it tends towards maybe, I don't know, 55-45, 60-40 in the sweetness range. If you don't like your cocktails overly sweet or even just a tad bit, even 5% sweeter than they should be, I'd probably dial the Orgeat back to about 1/2 ounce or 15 milliliters. Anyway, right up front, you're hit with that pineapple juice, which is rounded out by the orange. Speaking of which, for my orange liqueur, I'm using Pierre Ferrand's dry Curacao. Now, the original recipe calls for 3 ounces of orange juice. In a cocktail, orange juice can be super overpowering. So I'm taking a page from 3 Dots and a Dash actually. So the way that they make their 3 Dots and a Dash at 3 Dots and a Dash in Chicago is not with orange juice, but with Orange Liqueur instead. And I actually find that helps balance a cocktail way better. Then we're being hit with this bourbon and rye combination. So for my bourbon, I am using Shadow Ridge bourbon, and for my rye, I am using Rittenhouse 100 proof rye. I like this combination. Now the original one didn't do a split base, but I guess what one whiskey can't do, two can. For those of you that don't know that reference, you don't know your tiki history, because Don saying was what one rum can't do, three can. So in modern tiki, we are seeing a now split base of whiskey as our base spirit. So instead of going all bourbon or all rye, we're seeing a lot of people split the base. That bourbon is bringing in this nice sweet note from the corn in the mash bill, while the rye is adding the spiciness that is also complemented by the aromatic bitters. Speaking of which, for that, I'm using Bitter Truth Company Aromatic Bitters, but feel free to use any aromatic bitters that you like. In regards to that, actually use any of the ingredients that you like, that you have of your own, but at the end of the day, like, these are what I use because it's what I have. But so again, your mileage may vary. If you use a different bourbon, like your favorite bourbon, it might be, like a little bit more banana forward. And at that point, it might change the flavor profile, but understand that I try to use things that are pretty commonly accessible to most people. All of these flavors, right? So we've got the pineapple juice, we've got the orange, we've got this sweet bourbon and spicy rye. And all that leads through to this nutty Orgeat. And for my Orgeat, I am using BJ Reynolds Orgeat, but again, feel free to use any of your own, including a homemade recipe. Which, by the way, if you want a homemade recipe, I'll leave a link up here to one that I use and in the description below. So it is really just a well-balanced cocktail. At the end of the day, the original one is super unbalanced. 6 ounces of juice, only 3/4 ounce of acid, and 1.5 ounces of syrup. It is overly sweet. Now, the original one does use 3 ounces of booze, so it's a larger, heavy cocktail. I wanted to maintain that in mind, which is why we stuck with 2.5. The 1 ounce of rye, because we don't want it overpowering, and we want that sweetness from that bourbon to come in for 1.5 ounces. Again, why I made that decision. Other than that, I mean, everything kind of stays true to the original. Now, the original doesn't include saline, but I include that in all my cocktails. For those of you that have been questioning using saline in your cocktails, I highly recommend it. Essentially, it does the same thing in cocktails that it does for food. It enhances flavor. It doesn't leave a salty aftertaste. Essentially, what it does is it's going to highlight each individual flavor and allow you to actually pick them out easier. It also doesn't include aromatic bitters, but again, I like to include aromatic bitters in every single one of my cocktails. It's like pepper. It's going to add that seasoning that adds complexity to your cocktail without really changing the flavor profile. Yeah, I mean, other than that, they're pretty standard choices. I talked about everything else. I talked about the Orgeat. I talked about the main swap between orange juice and Orange Liqueur, and why I did the split base on the whiskey. So yeah, I mean, that's about it. It's a much more manageable cocktail. I don't need a giant glass to drink this thing because it's not full of 6 ounces of juice and 1.5 ounces of syrup and 3 ounces of booze. Instead, it fits really, really nice into a Collins glass. So is this a Polynesian Paralysis? No. Is it pretty close? I'd say so. I would call this as close as you're gonna get to a reproportioned Polynesian Paralysis without greatly changing the flavor profile and creating basically a riff. Now, that's a whole nother discussion that I could go into, right? Like, what point can you call a cocktail? The same name, right? Like, at what point does a Mai Tai no longer become a Mai Tai and it becomes a riff? Like a bitter Mai Tai. Or at what point, or like a bitter Mai Tai, right? Or at what point does it become a completely different cocktail that may be based on a Mai Tai template but shares no resemblance to a Mai Tai whatsoever? So if you guys would love to see actually me kind of give my rant and my feelings on that subject, drop a comment below, let me know, because I actually do have set criteria that require me to fit things into certain categories, right? Like, I can call this a Polynesian Paralysis because it fits within certain requirements that I have for calling it by the same name. If I were to change some things, then I'd have to call it a riff. If I changed a lot of things, then I would have to call it a completely different cocktail. But again, if you guys want to see that, let me know. I'll be more than happy to share my thoughts. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Quick, dirty, just here's my version of a Polynesian Paralysis. If you were to come to Woosong and order one, this is probably how I'd serve it to you, because the original one I think is honestly atrocious. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click that little notification bell so that you know when I post new videos. Follow me over on Instagram and TikTok at Easy Tiki Drinks. I do have Patreon, so if you want to subscribe to that, there's a link in the description below. Other than that, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, you know the deal. I'm Andy, and I want you to take it easy.